On today's show, I will break down 5 prospects who just missed my list of the top 10 prospects in the Mets farm system heading into 2025.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Over the past month, even more specifically, I'd say the last probably 2 to 3 weeks, I've really been diving deep into the Mets farm system to come up with my newest list of the top 10 prospects that the Mets have right now. And I've done this year over year here with this show. And this year, I actually expanded the list to a top 15. So on the show today, we're breaking down the 5 prospects that just missed the cut of being considered a top 10 prospect in this system going into the 2025 season. Now, if you missed yesterday's show, I broke down the top catching prospects in the Mets system as a segue into this list, as there's no catching prospects in my own personal list of the top 10 in the system, but there's one that gets a nod here at number 15, and that is Yovani Rodriguez. Yovani Rodriguez signed for $2.85 million last year, made his debut in the Dominican Summer League, didn't have a great campaign, but certainly didn't have a bad one. 715 OPS, 8 doubles, 3 triples, 2 home runs in 44 games. We're talking about a guy that just turned 18 in November, as typically international signings are teenagers. So it's still very early to know what Yovani Rodriguez will become, but he was the prize of last year's international class. And because of that, because of the signing bonus, because of the potential of a guy that could be a plus defensive catcher that might grow into some power, we'll see what he ends up developing as a hitter. But I thought he deserved a nod over the other catching prospects that I was considering putting in that number 15 slot. And again, you can go back to yesterday's show or go to that specific video that I created just focusing on the catching prospects that you can find on YouTube to sort of see all the different catchers that were in contention for that number 15 spot. But ultimately, I believe right now, Yovani Rodriguez should be considered the top catching prospect in this system, and that has him just barely cracking my top 15. Number 14 is Boston Barrow. Now, Boston Barrow was drafted in the 8th round in the 2023 MLB draft. He signed for $700,000, which is about 3.5 times his slot value, which was around $190,000. Slot values are assigned to each pick, and teams that have an overall bonus pool for all of their different picks that they can use to sign them all. Some high school players might get an over slot sign to be able to forego going to college, and that was exactly the case with Boston Barrow. Really, he got like 3rd round pick money, played 7 games at the complex in 2023, had an 879 OPS, but obviously that's a super small sample size. In 2024, he started the year in Port St. Lucie, so he didn't get any more run in the complex. That put him right to low A. And he had a really good season. 84 games played. He hit 288, 368 on base, 399 slugs. So not a ton of slug in his game just yet. Only 4 home runs, but he did have 16 doubles and 4 triples. He stole 8 bases on 9 attempts. So it was very efficient on the base pass. Good discipline, walked 11.1% of the time, struck out only 17.8% of the time. So it's one of the better strikeout to walk ratios of the Mets hitters in their farm system. So you like that. You like the discipline. Solid defender at multiple positions, drafted as a shortstop. Colin Houck was the more primary shortstop in Port St. Lucie. So you saw Boston Barrow get some time at second, get some time at third, really add to his overall versatility. And then he did get a promotion to high A, which is a difference between him and some other guys who were also infielders that were spending time in Port St. Lucie. AJ Ewing was one. Obviously, Colin Houck, the 1st round pick of Boston Barrow's draft class, was another. He really struggled. Marco Vargas, who came over in the David Robertson trade, also spent a ton of time in Port St. Lucie. But Barrow was the one that outperformed all those guys and ended up in Brooklyn. The other guy that outperformed all of them is Jesus Baez, who's going to be featured much more prominently once we get to the top 10. And he had an outstanding start to the season in Port St. Lucie. got the call early and then had a torn meniscus that cost the second half of his season. But Boston Barrow is definitely one of the top infield prospects in this system. He's 6'1", so there is some size that he could grow into there. He could grow into that frame a little bit, and maybe there is a little more power that he can develop. But right now, what you're looking at is a utility infielder who's got a strong hit tool. I would put him out there as a Louis Guillorme type, but a little more athletic. Barrow is still only 20 years old, so there's still some time to add to his tools. But the main one that you're looking at here is a solid glove and a solid hit tool and strong plate discipline. So again, that does remind me a little bit of Guillorme, but Guillorme didn't have the speed to steal some bases. Obviously, Barrow didn't steal a ton, but he was efficient when he did steal. And again, a little more athletic than Guillorme was. At the same time, Guillorme is not a bad outcome. I mean, you might hear, why are we talking about Louis Guillorme as, a success story? But look, if you get a big leaguer out of your farm system, that's a success. You got to realize that. The fact that Louis Guillorme is still cycling around the big leagues, I think he's now at the Astros, getting MLB opportunities, that is still, a lesser outcome than the guys that just never make it. So Boston Barrow, I think he has a good shot to be a big leaguer someday, and that makes him one of the top prospects in the Mets system. Number 13, another infield prospect, Yovani Rodriguez. Now, Yovani Rodriguez was acquired in the Tommy Pham trade at the 2023 deadline, skyrocketed up some top prospect lists. I think he even made it into some top 100s because he had an outstanding season in the Dominican Summer League. After the trade, he posted a 1247 OPS in 13 games with the DSL Mets. So that was really exciting to see what he did. There was a lot of buzz around his name last year, and I don't think he really disappointed, but he didn't really build on that buzz to vault and be a consensus top 10 prospect in this system. Last year, I think I did have him in the top 10, to be completely frank and honest, but I think other guys certainly outperformed him last year and are now safer bets. And that's why they ended up in my top 10 over Rodriguez. But you're talking about a guy that came stateside at 17 years old, eventually turned 18 last year, hit 282 at the complex, 355 on base, 400 slug, 3 home runs, 2 triples, 10 doubles in 50 games, stole 17 bags, but was caught 8 times. Not an elite fielder, but a strong one right now. Still seems like he can stick at shortstop, has a strong enough arm to slide over and play third as well. So again, you're getting into that utility infielder profile. Another righty fielder, but lefty hitter, just like Marco Vargas, just like Boston Barrow. And I'll be honest, I was really debating between Barrow or Rodriguez. Barrow is further along, clearly. He's going to start the year right back in high A. Rodriguez likely going to start the year in Port St. Lucie. It'll be interesting to see where they put Colin Houck. If they move Colin Houck up a level, that would basically just be, I guess to move him along. But, especially considering his struggles, I don't know if you can justify that. We'll see what they do there. It would clear shortstop for Yovani Rodriguez. So if not, both of them will be at that level. It'll be interesting to see how they split time there. I think adding versatility to all these guys is great, but you definitely want to keep some of these shortstop prospects playing shortstop. I'd love to see Yovani Rodriguez get the, runway to be the starting shortstop in Port St. Lucie all year, because I think there is a chance that he can still pop a little bit. Maybe he can develop a little more power. So far, the exit velocities, the hard hit rates, they aren't necessarily great to suggest that the power is coming, but you're still talking about a teenager who, despite not setting the world on fire in the Florida Complex League, still hit 282, still got on base at a 355 clip. Ultimately, the reason why I chose Rodriguez over Barrow is just the fact that he's 2 years younger. Barrow, 20 years old, I think you can bet on his floor a little bit more, but I'll take the ceiling and prospect rankings, and I went with Yovani Rodriguez. Now we got a couple more to close out our top 5 that just missed the cut of the top 10. We've got number 12 and 11 coming up in just a minute. First, though, a quick word from our sponsors. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Our next goal is to get to 13,000 subscribers by opening day. Appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. Number 12 on my list of the top prospects in the Mets farm system is Blade Tidwell. Now, Tidwell has been featured prominently in top 10s. I've had him the last couple years, I believe, in the top 10. But I have dropped him a few slots as there's a couple of pitching prospects that we'll be talking about tomorrow as I get into that back half of the top 10 that I am a little bit higher on now. I don't think it is a drastic difference, and I certainly think Blade Tidwell has potential to still dream on. This is a guy that can touch 99 and can grab 100 this year. That's what he said. He said he expects to grab 100 this year when asked how hard he throws. And he said last year topped out at 99, but I expect to eclipse 100. So you're talking about a hard thrower, a guy that had a great start to last season, and that's why in my midseason rankings, I sort of skyrocketed him up a little bit. I think I had him at number 7 at one point. Now, you look at what he did in Double-A. Nearly 40 innings pitched. I think it was 37 and a third. Pitched to a 2.41 ERA, struck out 44 batters. His strikeout per 9 rate was over 10. When you get that in the double digits, that's a really good sign. His walk per 9 was under 3. It was at 2.7. So those were really strong numbers. He goes up to AAA, which was an aggressive promotion. He struggled mightily. He pitched to a 5.93 ERA. His strikeout per 9 rate dropped to 8.2. His walk per 9 more than doubled to 5.6. His whip went from just over 1 to 1.5. So really brutal stretch in AAA. He talked about it after his recent start in spring where he gave up 3 runs. He mentioned how last year he was toying with a lot of pitches, a lot of different variations of his slider, his breaking ball. Talked about different changeup grips and two-seam grips and just was really trying to find himself. He said he had as many as 9 pitches last year. He has now found an arsenal of 5 that he plans to roll with this season until hitters figure him out, he said. But that's encouraging, at least, that he's sort of, narrowed into the pitches that he wants to throw. And his last 2 starts in AAA, very small sample size, but they were encouraging. He finished his year strong, 5 scoreless in 1 outing where he allowed just 3 hits, 2 walks to 4 strikeouts. Then his final start of the season, he did give up 2 runs off of 3 hits, but he did not walk any, hit 1 batter, and struck out 10. So if Blade Tidwell can find a little bit more of that, if he can hone into his arsenal as a pitcher with 5 pitches instead of just a guy that's trying to find it, throwing all these different variations of his pitches, different grips, all these different things, there's a world where you get a solid starting pitcher who could pop still because he has the stuff to. I'm looking at this year as make or break for Blade Tidwell as a starting pitcher. I think that there's a world where they at some point say, all right, this isn't working. We're going to focus on that fastball. Let's have you just pitch and relieve so you're grabbing 100 with consistency, and let's find the best breaking pitch you got. Maybe, depending on how the changeup comes along, the sinker, with the 2-seam, is there a 3-pitch mix that you can roll with and bring that to the big leagues and potentially be a lights out high leverage reliever? That's not a bad floor to talk about here with the prospect where, as much as you don't want the reliever risk, at the same time, it does give you a fallback. If you have a pitch ability starting pitcher that can't figure it out, what's the upside to stick him in the bullpen? When you're talking about a guy like Blade Tidwell, there's plenty of upside to dream on in the bullpen if the Mets ultimately decide to go that route, but you want to give him every opportunity to make it work as a starting pitcher first. Another full year in AAA for Blade Tidwell. He could impress, and you know what? He is a wave of starting pitching depth this year because he's at the highest level. If he's outperforming Brandon Sproat and Dom Hamill, he's going to find his way, to the big leagues this year, potentially, depending on injuries and everything else. I wouldn't call that likely. I think a full year in AAA is probably the best thing for him. But if he shows out and really starts to dominate, you can't count him out. So Blade Tidwell does miss my top 10 prospects, but he's not far off at all. Still a top 5 arm in the system. I will say that. I don't want to spoil who made the top 10, but I will say still comfortably a top 5 arm. Now let's talk about the guy that was my last cut from the top 10, and I struggle with it. I really thought about bringing him on, and I'll just let the cat out of the bag about the decision I had here. I was looking at Nick Morabito and Drew Gilbert for a very long time, and ultimately I felt that Drew Gilbert did not deserve to fall out of the top 10 based on an injury-plagued year. So I gave him the benefit of the doubt to still be in the top 10. And Nick Morabito is the guy that, again, I actually tried to squeeze both of them in there, but I ended up putting Nick Morabito at 11. Now, Nick Morabito was the player of the year for the Mets last year. Second round pick out of high school in 2022. He was drafted with the comp pick the Mets got when Noah Syndergaard signed with the Angels. So thank you, Thor, for Morabito. In 2023, he hit 306 with a 421 on base, 407 slug. That's an 828 OPS between the complex and Port St. Lucie. He stole 21 bases on 25 attempts. Last year, once again, he began the year in Port St. Lucie, and he tore the cover off the ball. He hit nearly 400, and there was a while where he was hitting over 400. Hit 397, 530 on base, 513 slug, which is mostly due to the fact that he hit nearly 400. Walked the same amount of times as he struck out, 18 strikeouts, 18 walks in 24 games. Got on base over half the time again, and a lot of that was just putting the ball in play. You know, you're talking about low A, not a ton of great fielders. Let's be honest. I mean, there are some, but the defense, of course, as you move along, gets better and better and better. So I think when you look at the difference between his numbers in low A and high A, obviously the pitching plays part of it, but I really think that the reason why you saw him get on base at a 530 clip and hit, almost 400 for a large portion of the season, he's got really good bat to ball skills, and you just put the ball in play and you have blazing speed in low A, you can just find your way on base a ton, beating out infield hits. Now, he was 11 for 15 on stolen base attempts, so efficient at that level, certainly. I wouldn't, not the most efficient, but definitely solid. You're not going to complain about a guy that is still stealing, what is that, 70% of the bases? We know my math sometimes on the fly isn't always the best. 11 divided by 15, 73%. Yeah, that's not bad. Obviously, as he improves, you'd love to see that rate get even better. How does that compare to what he did once he got to high A? High A, he stole 48 bases on 59 attempts. That is 81%. So that's pretty impressive that stolen base conversion rate got better. And if he can stay in that 80% range, and if he can get off 74 attempts a year, I mean, that's what he got off last year. That's impressive in of itself that he attempted to swipe over 70 bases. But yeah, I mean, if you talk about, let's just say this year he gets even crazier. He gets off 80 attempts and he steals them at an 80% clip. You're talking about 64 stolen bases. So this guy has that in him, which is really impressive. That is the carrying tool, is his speed. And that's going to manifest itself multiple ways. As a hitter, the good thing about Morabito is he's disciplined. So he's getting in good counts and he's drawing his walk. So that gives him, an ability to leverage that speed more. And then he's hitting for a high average. We saw in the spring training game already, him hit a soft grounder up the middle, gets on first, steals second, that quickly. So that's really the tool that is exciting with Morabito, is that speed. But when you pair that with good discipline and a strong hit tool, there is a potential for an above average offensive profile. And you're looking at a guy that could be the center fielder of the future for the New York Mets. I think there's others that are ahead of him in line. I'm looking primarily at Jet Williams, who's the Mets' top prospect in their farm system. I guess I'm letting one of the cats out of the bag for this upcoming top 10 release. But I think anyone who knows the Mets system knows that Jet Williams is regarded in that manner. He can play short. Jet Williams can. He can play second. He also can play center field. I think when you look at the composition of the Mets roster, with Lindor at short, not necessarily McNeil at second base. McNeil is obviously the stopgap. But now when it comes to depth at that position, you still have Acuna and Mauricio. You have Brett Beatty kind of in the mix at second. So there's just a lot of guys that could play second base. And I look at Jet Williams, and I do wonder if his athleticism would be wasted a little bit at second base. So I'm still sort of earmarking center field as Jet Williams' position. But you still never know. The Mets might play him at second, and that could leave center field open. Drew Gilbert could potentially play center field. Acuna could play center field. So all those guys are sort of in line in front of Morabito. But Morabito maybe starts the year in Double-A, or if not starts the year, could easily get a quick promotion to Double-A this year. And if he's able to have a similar amount of success in Double-A, he's hitting over 290. He's getting on base well over a 350 clip. Again, last year in high A, he had a 294 average, 373 on base, 374 slug. So not a lot of power, but if he's getting on base at that clip, if he's hitting for a high average, if he's stealing his bases, and if he continues to improve in center fielder right now, he is a good defender. He's not quite a plus great defender yet. His speed allows him to really make up some ground if he ever does misread a fly ball. But if he gets to the point where he's getting great reads combined with that speed, you're talking about a guy that's going to be really able to close the distance and field those fly balls in the gap and make some exceptional plays. If that starts to happen and he can go from a good center fielder to a great center fielder who's getting on base at a high clip, hitting for a high average, stealing a ton of bases, again, he could be the center fielder of the future. He could cut the line. He is as exciting of a prospect as the Mets have. That is just outside my top 10. So that's my list there, 11 through 15. Again, Nick Morabito, Blade Tidwell, Jeremy Rodriguez, Boston Barrow, and Yovani Rodriguez. Tomorrow's show, we'll dive into the back half of my top 10. So we'll go 6 through 10. But let's talk a little bit about spring training notes. We're going to talk about a few things that happened today, some of the outcomes from the game, as well as an injury note on Starling Marte. We'll get to all of that in just a minute. First, though, a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by my favorite snack, Wonderful Pistachios. This is nearly an empty bag of Wonderful Pistachios, and it's my favorite flavor, the honey roasted. I gotta go get me another bag, but I have some other Wonderful Pistachios in the house. You have the lightly salted, the roasted and salted. I think there's a barbecue flavor I've yet to try. Wonderful Pistachios are a high protein nut, actually one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you feel fuller, longer. Personally, I love the no shell varieties of Wonderful Pistachios because it's the perfect grab and go snack when I'm working in my office and there's right by my side where I can just reach my hand in the bag, throw a couple pistachios in. If I'm on the road, Wonderful Pistachios are a great snack. I also like to take them on the golf course, throw in my golf bag. A little bit better than beef jerky for me, at least for my personal taste. And again, Wonderful Pistachios are a great source of protein. They're a complete protein providing all 9 essential amino acids. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, don't worry. There's still the in-shell Wonderful Pistachios available as well, which are a classic favorite. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. And I do want to let you know, for the insiders that are subscribed, I am planning to do a giveaway today. I'm going to have a text go out at 2 p.m. with the rules of the giveaway. So make sure you're tuned in for that. And if you're not a subscriber yet, why don't you, subscribe? You can get in on that as long as you are subscribed before 2 p.m. Now let's talk about some spring training notes. The Mets lost on Wednesday by a score of 4-1 to the Marlins. Paul Blackburn got the start, probably the most notable player to talk about from this game. He made 7 pitches. All of them were for strikes. 1, 2, 3 inning. Picked up a strikeout. So a nice day at the spring office for Paul Blackburn. He said he liked how everything came out of his hands. He's feeling really good. Seems like Blackburn, if all things go well, she'll be ready by opening day. Will he be fully stretched out to 100 pitches? Maybe not, but honestly, based on the construction of the Mets roster, if they don't sustain any more injuries to the rotation, there's a massive knock on wood. You could see Paul Blackburn and Tyler McGill potentially, combining in that fifth starter spot, or Paul Blackburn and Griffin Canning. They could piggyback a couple guys there, and that might be a way to have some of these guys maybe be at 80 pitches or 70 pitches when camp ends and still be a big part of this team stretching out throughout the beginning portions of the season. So really good notes there. Genesis Cabrera had pitched a strong inning. Been talking about him a little bit as the non-roster invite that's most intriguing to me. A guy that has had a lot of success in big league bullpens, and as recently as last year for the Blue Jays, over 60 innings pitched, don't have the ERA in front of me in my notes today, but I think it was in the 3.6s. So a guy that has a lot of potential to just be a solid lefty for you. And it was a 1-2-3 inning today, and he struck out 2. So good inning from him. Anthony Gassé also pitched a 1-2-3 inning. He struck out 1. He is definitely in the competition with Genesis Cabrera and Danny Young for a second lefty in the Mets bullpen. That's assuming AJ Minter is healthy. If Minter is not healthy come the start of the season, you can definitely expect at least one of these guys to make the team. On the offensive side of things, Pete Alonso had an RBI double, scoring the only run for the Mets in the 4-1 loss. Alonso went 1 for 2 with a walk. He has yet to strike out in camp. He's had a great start to spring. Jeff McNeil doubled as well. Luis Angel Acuna got 1 at bat, played a little bit of third base, handled a pop-up. Brett Beatty did not get out there as far as that competition between those two guys. The big note of the day, though, is an article written by the New York Post talking about Starling Marte and continued knee soreness. Now, I dealt with this pretty much all of last year. Some good days, some not so good days, what Carlos Mendoza said about Marte's knees. Remember last year, the Mets were hesitant to play Marte on turf. They're hesitant to play him back-to-back days at times. So this is definitely something to consider here. There's a world where Starling Marte just never gets ready enough to be good for the opening day roster, or even at various points throughout the season. Marte is going to spend some time on the IL. There's no doubt about that. He's got 36-year-old knees, and you're talking about the guy that's the active leader on stolen bases in Major League Baseball. He played a ton of center field on those knees early in his career, so a lot of mileage there. I think this is why Marte is really suited for the role that the Mets have him tapped for, which is lefty masher in a DH platoon. And I think there's a world where you just don't play him in the outfield. I mean, the Mets can structure that very easily. When you want Juan Soto to get a day off his legs, or same thing with Brandon Nimmo, stick Tyrone Taylor out in the outfield and have them DH and just make it that simple. You don't have to force Marte into the outfield. You can literally just have him DH all year long and never play an inning of the outfield and maybe preserve him a little bit. If you want to find a day for Nimmo to get off his feet and be the DH, but you don't want to sacrifice anything offensively, stick Jesse Winker out there. I don't think that Marte is a significantly better fielder than Jesse Winker at this point. We saw Winker play right and left last year. He's not going to be a great defender out there. He doesn't have Marte's arm, but he's got better knees. And, if he is starting in the outfield, Winker is, that Tyrone Taylor is going to come in and field those final couple innings anyway. So I look at this and I don't think it is of serious concern yet as far as opening day. The Mets are still saying he should be good to go, but it's definitely something to watch. And I also think that if Marte does end up starting the year on the IL, it's going to open up some interesting conversations when it comes to roster construction. On yesterday's show, I talked a lot about the need or lack thereof for a backup shortstop. But if you end up in this position where Starling Marte is on the IL, you have one more roster spot. That does bode a little bit better for a Donovan Walton to make the team, although I'm still throwing cold water on it. Anthony DeComo is doubling down on his take that Walton's going to make the team because you have to have a backup shortstop or the entire world will explode. And I was going back and forth with people today about this one. And I got one note. Maybe you want a backup shortstop in April to ease Francisco Lindor into the season. How many innings did Joey Wendell play at shortstop in the first 20 games last year? Just because this is so important that Lindor can't play every day from jump. How many innings? 1. A single inning in the first 20 games of the season. Really didn't get out there much until Lindor got sick. And then there was like that 2-game span where Lindor didn't finish one game because he was sick, and then he didn't start another game that he was sick. And that's where Joey Wendell racked up a majority of the 16 innings he played at shortstop. Then Jose Iglesias played 4 innings in a 90-game stretch between getting promoted from AAA and Lindor hurting his back. And then, of course, at the end of the season, we saw a lot of Acuna. And that's the way it should be, in my opinion. If Lindor can't shoulder the burden that he expects to, well, then you make the move and you bring up Acuna or Mauricio, assuming they don't just break camp with the team. But I just would not feel that pressure to put a shortstop out there. And I talked about it enough yesterday, but again, I was going back and forth with people all day on this one. Another one of the most common, playing devil's advocate arguments that I was seeing about why Walton should make this roster is the idea that spot on the team isn't going to play much. And if that's your argument for a player of why he should make a big league roster is because, hey, maybe he won't play, what are we doing? I mean, I get the notion that, sure, when you have a DH, and if the DH platoon's pretty set with Winker and Marte, and Soto and Nimmo are playing every day, and you have two center fielders cycling in and out with Jose Siri and Tyrone Taylor, and Lindor, McNeil, Alonso are near everyday players in the starting lineup, and Vientos is every day at third, and Alvarez is catching a lion's share behind the dish with Luis Trent backing him up. I could see how you say, well, that last bench spot doesn't matter that much. Why have Brett Baty grab that spot when he can be in AAA playing every day? To me, it's because Brett Baty has nothing left to prove in AAA. But let's just say Starling Marte doesn't make the team. Or excuse me, Starling Marte makes the team, but is hurt and is on the IL with those bad knees. Now, does it make more sense to have Baty and Walton? Sure, you can say that. And you say, oh, well, that might open up some playing time for Brett Baty at third base because Mark Vientos can DH in that platoon with Winker. When there's a lefty on the mound, you can throw Mark Vientos at DH and third base opens up for Baty. But then Baty's hitting against left-handed pitching, not something that I necessarily want to see. I'd want to see Baty in there against righties. So it doesn't really fit in that manner. Where it does fit in that regard would be Luis Angel Acuna making the team, where in those instances, again, Vientos can DH as the other half of a platoon with Winker, and you slide Acuna in at third base. So I think any open roster spot continues to sort of push the amount of playing time and availability for an Acuna to make the team. But really, I think if Marte doesn't make it, you're actually looking at the outfielders potentially that could crack the roster. And the two names that really jump out, Jose Azocar and Alex Canario. Azocar, we've already seen a lot of in camp so far. Obviously, we're only a couple games in, but he has been playing a good amount in center field, has a home run already. Alex Canario is the guy that got in the recent trade with the Cubs, 24-year-old, plenty of power in his bat, some speed, guy that can play the corners in a pinch, can probably play some center field, but probably profiles more as a corner outfielder in the big leagues. He's an interesting name to watch in camp, especially now with the Marte news, because both of those guys, Azocar and Canario, do not have options. And the Mets probably think that they can push those guys through waivers at the end of camp. And a lot of times that does work out. And then they would both provide you some depth in AAA. But one of them can make the team and Marte does. And I think that's probably more likely than seeing both Baty and Acuna on the roster. Just because I think ultimately one of those two guys should probably be in the minor leagues with Mauricio playing every single day so that they are ready for when an everyday opportunity might present itself to get the call up and be, already hot and rolling instead of a guy that's, getting limited time off the bench. But I still think that bench spot ultimately makes the most sense for Baty. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. On tomorrow's show, of course, I'll break down any news items we have coming out of Mets camp, but I am planning to dive into the back half of my top 10 prospects in the Mets system. So we're going to talk about 6 through 10 on tomorrow's show, and then we're going to close things out on a Saturday edition of Locked On Mets, breaking down the top 5 prospects in this system. And all of that, of course, is barring any news that might throw off our scheduling a little bit here with Locked On Mets. As always, thank you all for listening. If you are listening on the audio side, make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, help us get closer to that goal of 13,000 subscribers by opening day. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.